where I bring you the story behind the stories and the storytellers. Today, I'm really excited to have middle grade author Jeanne Birdsall on the show with me today. She has a brand new book out called The Penderwicks at Last. You might know her from her New York Times bestselling Penderwicks series. The first one of that was The Penderwicks, A Summer Tale of Four Sisters, Two Rabbits, and a Very Interesting Boy. Thank you so much for joining me today, Jeanne.
And thank you for having me.
Well, I'm excited to have you. I don't get to talk to an awful lot of middle grade authors, but I always love it when I do. And thank you so much for taking time to come on with me today. We begin each show with the same question, and that question is, what is your first memory of wanting to be a writer or storyteller?
My first memory of wanting to be a writer, I don't remember. I can tell you my first memory of wanting to be a reader, which led to writing. Is that good enough?
Yeah, sure.
So I'll start over again. I have one older sister, 4 years older than I am. So obviously she could read long before I could. And my mom and dad were both readers. I have a memory of sitting on a couch in my living room, and I was short enough that my feet just stuck out in front of me. I think I was about 4, and they were all reading. And I knew that I was being left out of something, and I was dying to be introduced into this world of reading. That's a very strong memory. I remember writing things as an elementary school student, but I was more interested in becoming, a singer and dancer on Broadway, which was very sad because I can't carry a tune, but, young girls can dream just about anything they want.
Absolutely. You and I were talking before we started recording, and I kind of got excited because the conversation was starting to go places, and I said, we've got to stop and start recording because this is going to be too good. But the idea of loving to read or wanting to read so much that you felt like you were being left out of something. We were talking about, one of the most important things for a young person that wants to be a writer is that they need to be an avid reader. And there really are two tools in the writer's toolboxes, and that is that you need to read a lot and you need to write a lot. And out of those two things, writers are born. What were the first things that you fell in love with as a kid, and do any of those things stick with you to today?
Oh, yeah. And in fact, though I started reading, I didn't start reading real early. I wasn't a child genius. Like all those British, have you read biographies of these British people and they were reading Milton when they were 4 and stuff? I was like, what? I wasn't like that. I started reading at 6 and I read my way up through. I know that by 3rd grade, I had pushed my way out of the early readers, what we didn't call them, but sort of the Betsy Tacy world, and into pure middle grade as quickly as I could. And that was where I really fell in love with books. So for 3rd grade through 6th grade, I read and reread and reread and reread what was back then the middle grade library, which is, of course, much, 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 much tinier than it is now, because we're talking, you see, like 1960 to 62, somewhere in there, roughly. So the Narnia books and Edward Eager and Ian Nesbitt, Noel Strutfield, the shoe books, all those things that kids were reading when I was young. I not only read them, but I read them over and over and over and over and over. One of the interesting stories, I tell a lot of stories about my sister being mean to me because she was, but one of the sort of ironic memories I have about that was that she, at some point, I guess I was in sixth grade or maybe right after, announced to my mother that all I was doing was rereading the same books over and over again, and I should really be taken out of the kids' library and put into the grown-up library. And that was fine because I started learning a whole new bunch of stuff. But it was that rereading that turned me into a writer. By rereading all those favorite books, and I only reread the ones I liked, they became part of my intellectual DNA. I was learning, without realizing I was teaching myself how a story was told, how conversation works, all of that stuff. And then when I decided to start writing for middle grade, I went back to those books to compare my memory of them with how they were actually written. And I can give you one really good example. I was trying to figure out how to describe places. And I was really bored writing all of the details, and I was just starting to learn, and I learned pretty quickly that if I'm bored writing something, nobody's ever going to want to read it. So I went back to Narnia, the Narnia books, of which, have you read them? Did you read them when you were a child?
Of course, yeah, over and over again. Yeah.
Yeah, and do you have very clear, vivid memories of what Narnia looks like, all of the different places?
Oh, absolutely. It was, Narnia became my second home for about 3 years, I think.
Those descriptions are not in the books.
I know. Isn't that fantastic?
Right. Lewis gave us just enough that each of us could fill in probably what was most familiar to us.
Right.
And then so build this world that was part our world and part his world, and then it would become more real to us. So I tried to start doing that, of giving I think of it as just the barest architecture of the place where they're going to, just a hint of the smells and the colors and what they're seeing, but I don't go into complete detail because then the reader can't make it their own. Right. Well, I really went off track there. I'm sorry. Is that okay?
No, that's perfect. I love that. And Lewis had this great way of telling you something very succinctly, but that really exploded in your imagination. Like in The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, for instance, he would say something like, it was like always winter and never Christmas. And I think every kid knows exactly what that means. You know, when you're in the doldrums of January and February and Christmas has come and gone, and now you just have bleak, horrible weather with nothing to look forward to. And every kid knows what that means. And it paints an entire picture for you with that one succinct sentence.
Right. Yeah. Well, let me say every Christian kid. These days, I'd like to point that out. Every Christian
sure.
kid
Yeah.
Well,
of course, we speak from our experience, but of course.
Right. Yeah, and that's what he was most brilliant doing. And then going back, like, did you read The Secret Garden? I know that's sort of more of a girl's book, quote unquote.
Well, I had an older sister that was a year and a half older than me, and like your sister, she was horribly mean to me. And loving at the same time, but for payback, I would steal her books. So yes, I did.
Brilliant. So you did read that.
Yes.
Again, that's the description of The Secret Garden isn't real detailed.
Right.
It's something that we can make all of our own, which is why, like Narnia and like The Secret Garden, people take those things and say, this is my secret garden, or this is my whatever from Narnia, this is my caravel, because that was the gift he gave us. So that's what I try to do. I try to do that. When I say things like that, please let it be known that I am not comparing myself to C.S. Lewis, but I try to learn from the best.
Absolutely. In your bio, it says that you decided to be a writer at 10 years old. What was that defining moment for you?
That's kind of a lie.
Is that something publicists put together to?
I may have even said it once just to make things clear. I think I did want to be a writer, but as I mentioned, I also wanted to sing and dance on stage. I wanted to be a costume designer. So no, I am not one of those children that had a defining moment and stuck with it. And I think the point of that part of the bio, whether I wrote it or somebody else wrote it, is that even though at 10 I did think about becoming a writer, I didn't start until I was 41 or 42. And that's the important message I try to get across with that bio, that it isn't necessarily something you're going to just do coming out of the gate and then do for the rest of your life. And in fact, that sounds really, really, really hard to me. Do you know Marcus Zusak? Did you read The Book Thief?
I did, yes. I don't know him, but I know the book.
Right. I meant his work. So The Book Thief, which was an international bomb, just swept. It swept the world, and it didn't sweep the world like something like 50 Shades of I'm going to throw up in my mouth gray book. It swept the world because it was so brilliantly done, and it was a new way of looking at things, and everybody loved it, and it was a great story. I might have the details wrong, but I think he was around 30 when that came out. And his new book is coming out this year. It's taken 10 years for him to write another book. Early success as a writer can really big success as a writer can come too early.
Yes.
Because then how do you keep it up?
Right.
My success, the first book came out when I was 54, which was great because at that point I started counting if it took me 3 years to write a book, how many more books I could write before my mind went. So there was I didn't think I could peak and then go down a really bad hill of getting worse and worse and worse. It didn't seem like I had enough time, and that was kind of a gift.
I think it is. I know some writers in certain genres, science fiction and fantasy, that had just astronomical success with their first book. Went on to make award-winning movies and all of that stuff, and that is very hard to follow up, especially when people get this idea that they know who you are and know what it is that you should be writing. And anything that comes out second is just going to be a disappointment. It just always is, because people have created a character out of you at that point, and nothing that you can do will satisfy you. You can't recreate that one thing, and writers just have to find a way to come to peace with that.
Yeah, and actually, I'm trying to do the flip side of that, but again, it really helps to be older. I just turned 67 last month. So I'm working on my first book after the Penderwicks Series. The Penderwicks Series, there were 5 of them. I won the National Book Award. They're best-selling, blah, 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 blah. I'm grateful. I'm incredibly grateful. There is nothing I can do that people will like as much. I mean, I knew even by the second book that this was my peak, And if I were to ever be remembered, it was going to be for this series. And so I went very slowly and did the best job I could. I refused to hurry it through. But knowing that everything else is going to be a disappointment to people is very freeing.
Sure.
Because then I kind of say, well, okay, folks, then I'm really going to do what I want, which is it's a great thing. But again, being older, I think the Penderwicks are going to keep giving me royalties until for another, long enough for me to die, which is different than you've gotten a book that you're at such a star at 25. You think they probably won't be still giving me royalties in 60 years, so I have to up my game. There's a lot of good stuff about starting a career late.
Well, and also, when you're a little later in life, you usually have kind of figured some things out, and it's easier to be at peace with the way things are going to go. Like you said, that it's a gift that people may not be happy with anything you do outside the Penderwicks. At 20 years old, you could really get morose and melancholy about that. The world could be futile.
Yeah.
But after you've had a little life experience, those things are easier to put in context, I bet.
Yes.
Yeah.
a lot of life experience and a lot of therapy. So yeah.
Well, let's talk about the Penderwicks. You said you began writing them at 41. Is that right?
No, I began writing at 41, and it's a story. So I'll tell the story. My husband and I went to junior high and high school together, and we were part of the same group, and we were friends. And then he ran off early and got married young and had children, and I didn't run off or get married or have children. I was a very serious photographer, and I worked a lot of straight industry jobs just to keep myself independent and alive and to have a home and a dark room. And that went on for a very long time for both of us until things changed for me when I was around 40. A lot of stuff about my past came up, and I also realized that I wasn't living the life I'd wanted, that whatever it was I'd thought of in fifth grade, whether a Broadway musical star or a writer, or I wasn't doing any of that. I wasn't happy in the photography, even though it filled a great creative urge. It wasn't doing what you say you started this podcast to do. It wasn't getting me to talk to and meet a lot of interesting people making art. And so I was lonely and unfulfilled. So this was when the therapy started, and then I sort of opened my world to see what would happen. And what happened was that another friend from high school put my husband and me in touch. And he had, our friend put us in touch because Bill had left his wife. I didn't get in touch with someone who was still in a marriage. And we started to talk. We were in different states, and he lured me into helping him write a book about our shared past, which he was really just writing to woo me. But that's when I started writing. And that went on. Then we got married, and we tried to work on this book for a couple of years, and we finished a draft. We got an agent, but it never got published. And I always say that if you want to find out if a marriage is really going to work, try to write a book together in the first 2 years. And if you make it through that, you can get through anything. But anyway, at that point, sometime by now I'm in my later 40s, I said, what I've always really wanted to is write for children. And he said, I think you should do that. So that's what I did. So that's when I started working on the Penderwicks books at 47 or 48. And it took me a long time because I had to learn how to write a book. I had to look in those old Narnia books to find out how they handled description. I was counting pages and chapters. How long should a children's chapter be in paragraphs? And so I took all this internal knowledge, feel I had for the language of books, and then just put myself through a very brief but important technical learning thing, like, oh, okay, you don't really put 30-page chapters in a children's book. Think of it as something where they're going to say, I want to read one more chapter before dinner, and the parent says, well, only one more chapter, but if it's 30 pages, then they're going to miss their dinner. So that's what I did. And then 2005, it finally got published, and then we were off to the races.
With 30-page chapters, it would be, well, I just want to read one more chapter before breakfast.
Right.
A lot of kids.
Right. But it was also, I mean, it really isn't, it isn't that. I mean, somebody can write a 30-page chapter if they want, but it was really about learning pacing.
Right.
And how to break up. I mean, even if a grown-up book, if you're using 30 pages to get through one episode, it better be a really important, complex episode.
Right.
If you know what I mean. So,
sure.
So yeah.
And you need to understand your reader as well, and knowing that kids are going to want that one more chapter before dinner, or taking the book out of their backpack at school when the teacher says, okay, you've got 5 minutes until class ends, do something quietly at your desk, and knowing that they're going to be looking for those little moments to spend with your book. And if you can have a place where they can get in and out very quickly and easily, then you're going to hold the attention of that reader for longer.
I'll make it more pleasurable for them. Yeah.
Right. So your intention all along was to write for middle graders. What was it because of your experience as a reader that was your desire, or was there something else? Did you ever want to write other than middle grade?
Well, it goes back to the earlier question of you asked me about my early memories of reading. I think that was the question when I said that in late third grade and then into fourth and fifth, I really fell in love with books at that point. So I think I went back to when I most loved books. When it was I still love books. I still read constantly. I read 2 to 3 books a week. I always have. I always will. I could stop writing and live, but I couldn't stop reading and live. But the passion of reading back then, what it was like to enter these worlds for the first time. Okay, so here's an example of the kinds of things that I learned back then for the first time. I loved Edward Eger's books. He wrote Half Magic as the most famous one. He was writing in the 50s and 60s, I think. He was writing about when I was reading them. He had read to his son all the E. Nesbit books, all the magic ones, 5 Children, and It is the most famous. And he actually started writing those books, his own books, because he thought there should be more books like E. Nesbit's in the world. And that was in one of the hardbacks that I read in the library, his statement that was why he was writing these books. And then in almost every book, or maybe every single one of the books he wrote, there's some reference. The kids mention E. Nesbit. This was the first time that I had any sense of, and it was just a hint, but it was so exciting, that one of the things that writers do in their books is converse with other writers, the writers in the past or writers in the present, that they're writing to they're readers, but there's also this overlay of conversation amongst each other as they go back and forth. And that was the most exciting thing for me. And I was determined at that point that if I did ever write a book, I would reference Edward Eager in my books, and I have several times. And I tell children that, and I say, maybe when you grow up, you'll reference my book, and then you'll be another one in that line going forward. So now that I'm a grown-up and I read books all the time, I understand that, and it's always fun to find it, but it's still not that, there was a book once about modern art called Shock of the New. Robert Hughes wrote it, and that was that pleasurable shock of the new that I got when I was a little kid. And there's reading about Eager and Nesbitt, and you just don't get that once you've been reading for however many years it's been now, almost 60. Yeah, it has been 60. Oh, my goodness.
I want to take a pause from the show for just a moment to tell you about a sponsor. As a writer, your editor is often the first and last eyes on your work. The best editors are trusted collaborators, bringing your story to life in a way you didn't know was possible. Marlowe Moss will take your writing to a new level and your career to new heights, ensuring that readers not only buy your book, but also love reading it too. One top editor calls Marlowe Moss a talented author in his own right and as skilled an editor as I've seen. I use his skills myself. One of his authors says, "I had no idea my writing could be this good. Tension, POV, or timeline issues, plot and pacing, Marlowe does it all, and for the price of a copy edit." Your hard work deserves a better editor, and Marlowe Moss is the editing partner you've been looking for at a price you can afford. Offering developmental and copy editing as well as beta and proofreaders, visit marlowemoss.net for more information and a free sample edit. That's MarloweMoss.net. And let me tell you, I have used Marlowe Moss. He has edited a story for me, and the comments that I got back were eye-opening. You know, as a writer and as someone who spends time with words as much as I do, you tend to gloss over things. You just completely lose them because you're so involved in creating, and you need to step away and let someone else put their eyes on it and help you see the things that you can't see for yourself. Marlowe Moss is amazing. MarloweMoss.net. The family that in your books, you said that you grew up with a sister, I think like I did, and it was just the two of you and your parents. But where did the Penderwicks come from? This big family with these adventures. Did you know a family like this? Was this a family that you dreamed of? Where did these kids come from?
It was a family I dreamed of, but they came out of books. Little Women was the structure. By then I grew up in Philadelphia, but by the time I was working, my husband and I got married, moved to Massachusetts. I wanted to write a children's book, and I wanted to write about a group of siblings. And I didn't say to myself, oh, I want to create a family that I wish I'd had, but of course that's what ended up happening. But all those books I loved, there were always multiples of kids in them. And often I always liked there to be an even number. I wanted to write about an even number because I didn't want to write about any 2-on-1 conflicts, one person being left out. And I thought with 4, in any situation, everybody would at least have one ally, because I wanted this to be a healthy family, a family with joy. The healthy families in the books that I read growing up were what gave me hope that there was a different kind of family out there than mine. And I felt like if I could do that again for children now, that would be, I would be very grateful to be able to do that.
Um,
And
we were
I do. Oh, sorry.
no,
Go
no,
ahead.
go ahead. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to interrupt you.
No. It was stupid. You go.
We were talking earlier. I think it was before we started recording, and we were talking about the horrible advice that adults give to children that maybe want to become writers one day, and as well meaning as it may be, it's horrible advice for anyone who wants to be a creative person, and I think that a lot of adults maybe think that they could write middle grade fiction until they sit down and actually try and realize that it's really, really hard to do. And one of the big mistakes that people try to do is they have an obvious agenda, and they look at middle grade or children's fiction as a way to always have a teachable lesson. And there's nothing wrong with that, but they really wear that on their sleeve, and or they talk down to children. And they don't even realize that they're doing it until a kid picks up the book and they roll their eyes and they, put it back on the shelf and pick something else. You do not do that with the Penderwicks, obviously, and you make these great adventures that kids love to read and get immersed in. Is that something that you ever think about? Maybe writing or in the editing phase that you go through and ask yourself, am I connecting with the mind and the heart of a child here, or am I coming at this like I'm an adult? Like, how do you balance those things so that you do engage the kids, but without coming across as preachy or looking down, talking down to them?
I'll answer that in a minute because it's a really interesting question. But
Okay.
About the preachy and agenda stuff, the interesting thing about people still writing those kinds of books is that that was what very early children's books were like in the 19th century, when people were writing for children, and they always had morals and they always had lessons. And the E. Nesbit, for example, makes fun of those books. There must be one called Little by Little. I remember, or poor Rosie, some kid tells a lie and then dies. I'm probably exaggerating, but it took Louisa May Alcott and E. Nesbit and some very brave people to break through that and start writing directly to children. People who still try to do that really should check the history of children's literature, which is a very rich academic subject with fascinating things to learn about how children's literature evolved and how children's literature continues to evolve, and how so much of it is caught up in how we view childhood and what we think childhood should be as opposed to what it is, or what we thought our childhood should have been instead of what it was. So that's the one thing. The preachiness stuff is just silly and antiquated. As for being able to reach children, I have a part of me that's either a great skill or a part of me that's broken, and it's probably both. But I use it in the books, which is that I can go back into the emotional space of children, all the way through, actually, but I can very easily access my 9 through 11-year-old and remember how things feel and feel them now. I can react to things as if I were 9 and 11. So I don't have to worry about preaching down to children. I use my grown-up analytical skills and my childhood emotional memories and blend them together. And that's where the work comes from. Now, you didn't ask this, but I'll keep on talking until you get really bored and tell me to shut up. Am I still doing okay?
Oh, you're wonderful. Please keep going.
Oh, okay. Okay. So, as you know, there's this category called YA that has sort of taken over the world and galumphed and become huge with its big footprint sort of stomping all over everything. Not that I have an opinion or anything, but the frustration for a middle grade writer at the beginning of that phase, and I think we've moved out of it after a lot of protests, is that people were confusing middle grade and YA, and they were lumping us in and calling everything YA. And the reason they did that, I think, and I've read other people explain this, is that J.K. Rowling, when she wrote the first two specifically, maybe three of the Harry Potter books, they were very clearly middle grade books. Harry was the right age. She was writing with the mindset and content for a 10 or 11-year-old kid. And as she aged Harry up, she aged the content up. So she stuck with her readers. They could age along with Harry. By the time you got to the last three books, they were for teenagers. They were for young adults. So people called that series YA. And then the rest of us all got sort of dragged into it. So people have enough middle grade writers and editors and everybody have said, please keep us separate. It's really not fair to middle grade readers, for them to be lumped in with YA, because we're not just YA, but not with enough sex in it yet. It's a very, very specific emotional development time, which is that it's the age at which you are just realizing that being a member of your family isn't your only identity, that you've got some individuality outside of that very small clan, but you haven't yet repudiated your family altogether, or however teenagers do it, and make your identity about your peer group, because that's what teenagers have to do to grow up. Unless they grow up, they can go back to their family. There's actually this dividing line of, well, kids are just figuring that, and then they go, oh, whoa, teenagerhood, I'm going to let go of childish things. And I call it a mountain, that people go over that mountain, and a lot of people go over their mountain. They put away those feelings and childish things because they're desperate to become teenagers, to become grown-ups. And this is not a criticism. This is part of what happens developmentally. And they immerse themselves in teenagehood, but then there is never that same mountain between teenagehood and adulthood. There's never a point where somebody says, now I'm a grown-up, I'm going to put away teenage things. So people, as they grow into their 20s and 30s, take parts of their teenage self with them, and it's very easy to go back and access that when they want to write YA books. And I think that's why once people were given that permission in this thing that blew up in the last 15 years, I guess, we had more and more and more of them come into the field. Writing middle grade, you need to be able to go back over that mountain. And if you can't, you're not going to write good middle grade. Again, I feel like I talk for like a freaking half hour when you've asked me one simple. Okay.
No. That's perfect. That's perfect.
Okay.
Do you get? I find that really interesting when you talk about YA getting lumped in with middle grade, because as a father of kids, there are most definitely differences in emotional maturity and not only emotional maturity, but just the things that entertain kids at different ages. And when when my kids were 8, 9, 10, I didn't want their worldview being shaped by the Hunger Games yet. It's a very dour outlook on the world. I wanted them to still be able to find some hope and some I don't know, any word I try to use is just going to seem trite. So I wanted them to not have to confront the darkness of the world yet. There's going to be plenty of time for that. So yeah, when you're writing about the Penderwicks and you know that these children that are reading these will mature one day and will leave middle grade behind and move on to things, what do you hope for them that they will retain through life that they got from the Penderwicks?
Can I say one thing first about
Absolutely.
what you just said?
Absolutely.
So I think it's not, I agree with everything you said about the Hunger Games and its ilk with younger children, and hope actually happens to be my defining what I go through, because I needed hope to survive my childhood.
Right.
So if I can give them hope. But it isn't just that middle grade kids need to avoid the darker books for older kids. It's that they need books that assert the importance of a child of 10 or 11 and the importance of what that child can achieve in the world, and that what you're doing at 10 or 11, you're not just waiting to grow up. You're forming yourself, and you're bringing in, one hopes, the good things and the people that you're going to keep for a very long time. I was brought up somehow, I don't know how this message was given to me, but that you left high school and then everything started to happen in college, and that's where you found a husband and blah, 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 blah. And it works the opposite for me. I ended up marrying somebody I met in 7th grade. I still have some of my closest friends are people I went to elementary school. And I think that's an important message for kids, to say what you do now, any good you do now is important. You can change the world in little ways, and so this is your story. I guess that's what I'm trying to say. It's important that 10 to 11-year-olds have their own stories and not just tagging on to stories of some glorified later time. Okay, so then you asked about what I hope that kids would take away. I think what I've always hoped the most is that what I would help them love reading more. I work as hard as I can. I know my limitations as a writer, so I'm not pretending I'm greater than I am, but I work very, very hard to write well, to use language well, to use structure and storytelling well. And I sneak in references to Shakespeare and people, and I hope, because I believe. Okay, let me start it over again, because this gets deeper every time I talk about it. In today's world, in particular, the idea of truth and honor, the ideas of truth and honor are being attacked and smudged and muddied, and confusion reigns. I truly believe that understanding language and using language in communication is one of our only defenses against that kind of confusion, is knowing the words to use and when to use them and how to use them properly. So I try to do that just by telling a story, just by hoping that that a child will see that I'm not patronizing them. I hope that they'll find words that they don't know, and I hope that they won't bother to look them up, but that they'll sort of stick in their brain until they've seen them in other books, because that's how you learn language. And I hope that they'll learn that language is important, because I used, like, if they love the books and the stories and the characters, I hope they will at some point sort of get soaked into them, that all I used to give them those things was language, and that they can use language powerfully to keep our world on track.
Well, I think that's a fantastic takeaway.
Okay, that's my big answer. I've never gone quite that big, but you sort of keep encouraging me to go big. But that's really it.
I love that. You have probably gotten to know the Penderwicks very well in the years that you have spent with them in writing their stories. The newest book brings an end to that journey. I would imagine when you have such a successful series like you've had with the Penderwicks, that the temptation and probably the encouragement from publishers would be to continue that series, into perpetuity. What is it like for you bringing the Penderwicks story to a close in this final book of the series, The Penderwicks at Last?
I planned it this way all along. So it'll be a very different thing if I'd written 5 books and then said, you know what, maybe I should stop, and my publisher said, yeah, they're not selling as well, or something like that. The 5 books, I always knew there was going to be an arc. I always thought of it. I can't say I knew this at the very beginning, and this kind of came over the end, but I always knew there would be a finite number, and I was planting things in the first book that I knew would get played out in further books. I really thought of it as one big book that took me a very long time to write, and I think of it in a 3-act structure. So the first 3 books are the first act. They all take place within, I think, a year and a half. The girls barely age. All of the most important characters are introduced, and the major conflicts are introduced. And they're still bringing people into the family. The family's getting bigger in the 3 books. In the 4th book, I've skipped time to the point where it's time for some of the cracks, or the one major crack in the family, to break open and be looked at, because it's just been there all along. A conflict between 2 sisters that came not from anything they did, but from their mother's death. And for the family to keep going, for them to all grow up well, that has to crack open. So that's the 4th book. That's the second act. That's, everybody meets each other. It looks like everybody's going to lose each other instead of girl meets boy, etc. And then the 4th book, I jump forward again, and most of what was broken apart in the 4th book has healed. And people say, why did you skip so many years? It's because, it took that many years for that to get healed, and that was the next important part of the story I wanted to tell. And I also wanted to get those 4 original girls old enough so that I could send them off into the future knowing that they were fine. And that was really important to me. And in the meantime, Ben, who had gotten married into the book as a teenager, he's going to be fine. I adore him. And the youngest, Lydia, who's only 11 in the last book, I send her out. She's at the beginning of her adventures. And it feels like a wonderful place to stop. I was delighted There were times writing that book that I never thought I could do it. The pressure of ending that arc and tying together all of the important pieces that I needed tied together, plus making it Lydia's book and having it be just on her layer a fun adventure story at Arundel, just like the first book was for the other girls. It was technically difficult and exhausting. So I'm not sad at all. I'm delighted. I won't miss them. They're still in my imagination. The parts in the books are not. That's not where they live. They live in my head. That's just the part that I share with everybody. And I'm also really glad to just be able to go to one book at a time and give my brain a bit of a rest.
Well, the new book is out now, and it's called The Penderwicks at Last. There's a link to it in the show notes where everyone can go pick up a copy. You can pick up the entire series if you're just discovering the Penderwicks now. Jeannie, you said that you're moving on to standalone books now. Will you have a new release coming in the near future?
2021 is the date, probably. It's 3 years is about what I need to write a new book. So I was working on it up until you called. And that's all I can say. It takes place in Massachusetts again. So there's a backstory in Scotland, which was a pretty good excuse to visit Edinburgh a couple of years ago. I mean, that is one piece of advice I will give children if they want to write, to remember that they should put stuff in the books that they're interested in and want to explore, because that's a really good excuse to do it.
Well, and any excuse to go to Edinburgh is a good excuse.
Right. Oh, have you been?
I have not, but it's on our calendar to go.
Oh, gosh. It's really a treat.
Well, Jeannie, thank you so much for taking time out of your writing day to visit with us, and it's been a fascinating conversation. Thank you for doing that. Where can people find you online if they'd like to learn more about you and your books? JeanneBirdsall.com. It's very easy. My webpage. Okay. We'll put a link to that in the show notes, as well as a link to the books. Thank you so much for taking time to come on the show today.
And thank you for talking to me, Hank. It's been great.
Thanks for listening to the Author Stories podcast. For more great author interviews like this one, go to hankgarner.com and dig through the archives. There's something there I know you'll love. Now stay tuned for a special audio clip from Richard Gleaves' The Jason Crane series.
Didn't your dad teach you not to trespass? Yeah. Sorry, I'll go. Joey stepped forward, but Hedwig remained motionless, blocking the only exit. No. Someone needs to learn a lesson about respecting other people's property. Joey felt unnerved and panicky. Please, Hedwig. Mr. Van Brunt. Please, Mr. Van Brunt. May I go now? Please? Not such a smart-ass now, are you? His voice grew flat and contemptuous. You little bastards think you run the world, but you have no idea. No idea where your food comes from, what your parents have to go through to put clothes on your back. Humiliating jobs, long hours, going gray, to provide for you. What are you talking about? Life. Real life. You think it's easy, don't you? Don't you? Those stupid adults doing their stupid adult things while you play all day. Well, it's hard. You hear me? It's hard. Joey's breath caught. He knew what Hedwig was capable of. What did you do to Jason? Nothing. Where is he then? Jason's run away from home. I don't believe you. I don't care what you believe. I'm the adult. I ask the questions. What did you do to my son? To Zeph? Is Zeph okay? No, he's not. Zeph is not okay. And it was you, wasn't it? You're the one who did it. Who did What? Who twisted his mind? I haven't done anything to Zeph. Don't lie to me! Hedwig raised a hand, and a fireball blossomed there. Joey had never seen Hedwig's gift before. The man held a piece of hell. His face looked like something carved from driftwood, full of cracks and crevices. His eyes were shadowed and vacant, but glittering with flame, like knotholes full of fireflies. Yeah, someone's mind had twisted, but not Zeph's. Hedwig's gone batshit. Hedwig passed the fireball from one hand to the other. Did Zeph send you for his things? I know you know where he is. He said he was in love with you. Hedwig made it sound as if Zeph had confessed to murder. Is that true? I don't know. Hedwig broke into a wide grin. Well, we can find out, can't we? He's a Pynchon, right? A Pynchon would know. Know what? You're not making sense. It's their gift. The Pynchon gift. My son's a Pynchon, like his whore of a mother. And Pynchons are telepaths. They always know when the people they love are in danger. Joey's eyes had gone wide. He blinked, trying to process the information. Zeph had a gift? For sure? They have a psychic alarm. If you hurt someone they love, they come running. He raised the fireball. So let's find out. Let's find out if Zeph really loves you. Let's see if he's a fag or not. I know he's not. You'll see. He won't feel a thing when I do it. When you do what? When I burn you black. Joey went cold. Hedwig meant it.